We've read two books. We read The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis, and we read Edgar Huntley. Now, the thematic strand that ties these two books together is the idea that you cannot outrun your past. The sins of the father and the father's father and the father's father through 1,000 generations follow you. They follow you. And they take out their fury on innocent victims. And they follow you across the Atlantic Ocean. Time and space are irrelevant next to the power of the past and the force of shame. Now we look at these two books, right? So what ties them together? What ties them together? Because they're very different narratives. And we're looking at two characters who are dramatically different. I mean, there is a tremendous gap between, we have Edgar, who is the son of a farmer, and then we have Ambrosio, who is a man of celibacy, a man of the cloth. These are not men who intersect, but they do in very important ways, and what I want to do is get to the heart of that, okay? I want to look at what ties them together as characters, because I think that looking at what ties them together will get us to the heart of the American Gothic. And what I want to posit to all of you is that at the heart of the American Gothic is a deep sense of ambivalence. Ambivalence about everything, about decision-making, about our ability to govern. How can we govern a country if we cannot even govern ourselves? How on earth can we tell other people what to do if we are so susceptible to folly and to pursuing whims and to acting out impulse? Now, I want to talk a little bit about the labyrinth, all right? The labyrinth in Edgar Huntley and in The Monk. So what is this labyrinth? Well, we look at Ronald Paulson, the literary critic, and he posits that the Gothic labyrinth is a physical place that is hidden and separate from the outside world. Hidden and separate. But what I want to emphasize is that it is not remote, okay? You don't have to travel to the end of the earth to find the Gothic labyrinth. In fact, it might be right beneath you. Ambrosio and Edgar Huntley, they're two men who are very much in the Gothic mold. Why is that, okay? Why is that? Edgar Huntley is an aspiring intellectual. We can look at him as kind of a mirror of Charles Brockden Brown at that age. A young man with intellectual aspirations. He's well-read. He doesn't maybe have the means to pursue an academic career. He lives on a farm, but he has intellectual curiosity. And that becomes his undoing, right? And in the same way, Ambrosio has a curiosity that is at odds with his lifestyle. A man who is left on the steps of a monastery as an infant, raised in the cloth, raised with the vow of celibacy. He's never known any other life. And yet the past bubbles beneath the surface. It bubbles beneath the surface of the monastery, in the bowels of the church, and it bubbles within him. And when it asserts himself with violence, ruthlessness, and brutality, then he is the fullest realization of himself. Then he is the past and present, Ambrosio, the monk, the mutilator, the violator of Antonia. Antonia, the innocent, the chaste victim. But Ambrosio, too, is a victim, isn't he? He's a victim of circumstance. Children are not meant to be left on the steps of monasteries. I mean, I want to imagine for a second, think about when you were 13 years old, right? And you had all this wild energy that you couldn't place. Disparate energy. And it came together and you couldn't find a way to express it. And what you didn't know at the time is that you were becoming a sexual being. Well, Ambrosio becomes a sexual being and has no means to express it. When his sexuality finally emerges, it emerges with violence and depravity, because there's no other way, because he lived in denial. Denial of what it is to be human. That's the American Gothic. Right? You know, I had you read William Faulkner's Nobel Prize acceptance speech, right? And he says that the basest of all things is to be afraid. But once we realize that fear in ourselves, we must forget it forever if we are to move on and live lives of value and worth, right? Well, Edgar and Ambrosio are two men who cannot forget their fear. Their fear becomes them and it consumes them, and it sends them spiraling into the labyrinth. For Edgar, this labyrinth is the forest that lies right outside his hometown. Again, we're not talking about him traveling hundreds of miles. We're talking about him taking a couple footsteps away from home, and suddenly he's in a labyrinth of terror and depravity and shame. Ambrosio, the bowels beneath the church. He just walks down some steps and he's descended into hell. These labyrinths were always there. They were always there. It was just a matter of walking into them.
I don't know. It's like they dismiss, huh?